Now we're going to finish up our user management by talking about authorization. So we did sign in or registration or sign in. We did authentication. Oh gosh, I said those wrong. Registration or sign up, authentication or sign in. And now we're going to do authorization. Now the purpose of authorization is to make sure that you're only giving the user information that they have that they are allowed to access. So again, I don't want to have somebody log in. If I log in, I don't want to get Noah's information. I don't want Noah to see my information. I only want my stuff. So that's the sole purpose of authorization, is to figure out what you should have access to and make sure that you're only getting the right stuff. So here we go. Remember, we have our digital token that we sent back, that we sent to the client. So the client has to send that token back to us on every request. And in that token, when we get that token, we have to verify that it is a legitimate token, that it was signed by me, so I'm the one that issued it, and it hasn't been tampered with. Once I do that, then I say, okay, good, this user is allowed to be here. And then I look at the payload in that token, and I see the user's ID. I might see other stuff that goes along, like maybe their role or something else I might have put in there. Like maybe they're an admin. So I say role admin, and then I can give them admin privileges. But whatever it is in that payload is going to be the information that I need in order to guarantee that I'm only giving them what they're allowed to have. So the token has the payload in it. I verify the token, I extract the payload, and then I use that payload in my database queries to make sure I'm only giving them the stuff that they are allowed to access. Okay, and this has to happen on every single request. What's the thing that we usually use in Express when we want to do something on every single request? Express.
TSX watch.
No. Every request comes in. What do we usually want to use? Like how do we get the JSON body out? We use
The body.
Yeah, how do we get the stuff out of the body in Express?
On the server, we just use
.get.
request.body.
The middleware function.
There we go. We use middleware. Okay, so middleware is stuff that we use to process the request every time. You remember how JSON middleware works? Every request comes and hits the JSON middleware. The middleware looks and says, "Does this have a JSON body?" No, ignore it. Yes, get the body, JSON parse it, add it to the request as a body field. Okay, so that's what the JSON middleware does. So we're going to use that same technique in order to do their authorization. So when the request comes in, we're going to have middleware that looks at it and says, is the token valid? And if so, extract the token payload. And we're going to take that payload and we're going to assign it to a field in the request that we're going to name user. So now request.body has the JSON body. Request.user has the payload from the JOT token. That's what we're going to do. Okay.
The user has the payload, sorry?
Request.user is going to have the JOT payload.
Okay.
So that's really the concept here. Now, how does the client send us that token on every request? We can't make them put it in the body. That's annoying. And then some requests can't have a body. So what you do is you put it in the header. And the HTTP community has already foreseen all of the security issues that come up with using the internet. And they have invented a header named authentication. So there's their authorization. There's an authorization header named. So authorization is the name of the header, and you give the authorization header a value which contains your token. So now when the middleware looks and it says, is there an authorization token? yes. Sorry, let me restate that. The middleware says, is there an authorization header? Yes, then extract the token from there and then validate the token and then extract the payload from the token and then put it into the request as the user field. So that's what we're going to do here.
Oh.
So
as
the
the user.
authorization header, there's a scheme that is already standardized by the HTTP Standards Committee, which is called the Bearer Authentication Scheme, and that's the scheme that you usually use to send JOT tokens. What that means is you use the authorization header, and the value of the authorization header is going to be the word uppercase B, lowercase EARER space, followed by your JOT token. And that is what the value of the authorization header must be to be legal. That's how you send in the JOT token. Okay. A single space is required between the two. That must be exactly that word spelled exactly that way with exactly that casing. Okay. So you look for the authorization header, you get the authorization header, you look for the word bearer token. If it is there, then you extract token out of here, and that's the JOT token. You check to see if it's properly signed and you get the payload out of it. Then cool. All right. So any questions about this? So I like to think of authorization, again, going back to our theme park thing. Maybe when you go into the gate and pay your ticket, you show your driver's license, and if you're over 21, they give you a red wristband that says that you're allowed to buy alcohol. Otherwise, you get a blue wristband. So now when I go up to the bar, I show them my wristband. If it's red, they let me buy the alcohol. If it's not, they don't. And so that's the same idea. This token that comes in the header, this JOT token, is the red band that says, yes, you're allowed to do this. So that's what we're doing here, is we're just making sure that they really have the correct wristband. Okay. All right. Questions on this? Let me show you the code. Okay, so first of all, let's look at the middleware. Here's our middleware. So how do I verify that the JOT token is correct? There's a JSON Web Token NPM package has a method called verify. I pass it the token that I got from the request and the hash key that was used, the token secret, the hash key that was used to sign the token. So if I pass it both of those, then verify will say, okay, was this token signed by this hash key? And if so, has it been modified? So if either of those is false, it throws an exception. And otherwise it extracts the payload and returns it. So the payload gets returned here from the verify function. Okay. So that's the way we want the middleware to work to do our verification and our extraction. It does the verification and extraction of the payload in one call. Okay, so this returns the payload, which I'm going to assign to the user key. All right. So now the question is, how do I find the JOT token? I have the request. I have to get the authorization header. So the request has a method called get, and you pass it the name of the header you're interested in. That will return you the value of the authorization or of the value of that header. So I say, okay, I want to get the authorization header. I click get, and it will return the value of the authorization header. If there's a header there, it will return its value. If there's not, it will return undefined. So if it's undefined, then I don't want to do anything. So I use the question mark. And so the question mark says, if there's no authorization header, then token gets undefined and don't do the rest of this stuff. So now I've got the authorization header right here, the value of the authorization header. And remember, it has to be the word bearer space with my token. So we use a magic string method called split, which says, look for this string inside, look for this inside the string and split it in two right there. So it takes this part here and puts it in it creates an array. It takes this part here, puts it in the first element in the array, and everything else it puts in the second element of the array. So the second element of the array will be my jot token. So what I'm doing is first of all, I'm getting the authorization header, then I'm splitting it on the word bearer space, and then I'm getting the second element of the array, the one at index 1. This will then be the jot token, so that's the token. Usually most people write this code in 2 or 3 steps. Again, I was just trying to be fancy and wrote it in one. And I don't know if I made it readable this way. So much more readable would be to do it in 2 or 3 steps. So maybe I should do that.
So the second element, oh, sorry. I had a question. I was wondering if the number 1 is part of the same array as bearer, but what are we saying that number 1 is? Like the first user, or?
No, it's the index of that thing. So if there's
Okay.
if there's an auth, then I'm going to go const parts equals auth dot split on bearer. Okay. So this is going to be an array with 2 elements in it. And it's going to, in the first part of it, so if the function looks like this, if it looks like this, bearer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then parts of 0 will be this bearer here after the split, and parts of 1 will be this. So this split looks at the string, splits it in 2 pieces right at that spot right there, finds bearer, splits it in 2 pieces. The first part goes into parts of 0, the second part goes into parts of 1. Okay, so now I can now say const token equals parts of 1, because that's where the token's going to be. Okay, so this code here does in a few lines of code what this one does in 1 line. So I was just being a little bit too fancy there. Okay. All right, but let's go back to what it was. The fancy code. The important thing is at this point at line 14, token will either be undefined. It'll be undefined if the authorization header is not there, or if the authorization header does not start with the word bearer, then the token will be undefined. So if the token's undefined, then I know then, okay, you're not authorized. You didn't send me the authorization header incorrectly, and I'll just throw a 401. 401 means not authorized. So I'll throw a 401 that says authentication required. Then now I've verified that the token's there. So now I'm going to tell Jot, please verify that the token is one of my tokens, properly signed and unmodified. So I'll pass it the token that I extracted from the header and the secret key that I used to sign it. And it will check and make sure that's correct. If it's not, it throws an exception. And if it is, it returns the payload. Okay.
JWT, this is the JSON something.
This is the JSON Web Token NPM package up
Token.
here. Okay, right there. All right. Now, one last thing just for information is we've added something to the error middleware that says, so if the JSON Web Token does not verify correctly, then it throws an error that is an instance of jwt.json Web Token error. So we're going to look for that in our error middleware. If we get that, we're going to return a 401 invalid access token. Okay. That's not tremendously important to this. I thought I'd point that out though. Okay, so now that I've got it, I've set rec.user equal to the payload of my token, and then I call next. So that's what my auth middleware does. Now I go into server and I look at my auth, to use it, you could put app.use auth middleware right here.
Really?
And yes, and then because remember, the middleware just gets done
Okay.
in step after step after step. What that will mean is that every endpoint after this requires authentication. I find that too hard to work with because sometimes I'll forget and I'll put one down here where I didn't really want authentication. So I like passing in the middleware as an extra parameter to my endpoint. So you see here, whoops, where'd it go? What happened? Sorry. Revert. There we go. So here we go. So in this one requires authentication. So I just add auth middleware as another parameter here. And the way Express works is it will run this middleware before it runs this one. So if this matches, it'll run this middleware and then it'll run this middleware. Okay. So what will happen if it matches this get to-dos, it'll run the middleware. That'll validate that the user signed in, and it will put the payload into the user field. Then I'll run this middleware. So now when I say rec.user.user-ID, rec.user will have the payload in it. Okay. So now I can get the user ID and pass it into the user ID field here. Okay. So that's the main mechanism. I do want to point out that why don't I have auth middleware in my sign up and sign in?
Because we are not authorizing anyone yet.
Yes, if I require them to be signed in before they can sign up, then we've got a catch-22. They can't sign in if they can't sign up if they're not signed in, and they can't sign in if they can't sign up. So you can't put it here and you can't put it here, because these two have to be called by somebody who's not signed in, not authorized yet, because that's how they authorize. So you don't put it in those, you only put it in these ones that need it. So this way you're able to look and say, okay, this one needs authentication, this one doesn't, this needs authentication, this one doesn't. So if you need authentication, you just add the auth middleware in the second parameter there. All right, now the last thing is, how do I tell if, in this case, we're doing to-do items. How do I tell if a to-do item belongs to me or Noah? How do I tell the difference?
I wanna check the one and the one and the existing.
Over there on line 108. No?
Sort of. But so look, see how this works? The select works? What I did is I went into my to-dos table. So my to-dos table, I added a column in my to-dos called user ID. And this user ID is a foreign key that references the user that owns this to-do item. So now this user ID references one of these users. Whoever created this gets their user ID put there and they own it. They own this to-do item. They are the only ones allowed to read it or to update it. Okay. So when you create a to-do, we put your user ID in it, which indicates you own it. When you read a to-do, we check to make sure that your user ID matches the one that's in there. That way I'm not accidentally giving you somebody else's to-do items.
But where is that happening?
Okay. First of all, I add the column to the table so that it's in there. And then in my server code.
So it's kind of like you have a duplicate in the.
No, it's not a duplicate at all. It's a foreign key.
I didn't. Oh, it's an integer. Okay.
It's a foreign key. This is a foreign key to the user ID.
Okay.
So this indicates which user owns the to-do item.
Foreign key.
Okay. So that's been added there. So this is what you'll do in your database. So now when I do my select, I get the user ID of the current user from here, the one that's logged in. And I say where user ID equals that one. I'm not selecting all to-dos. I'm only selecting the ones that they own. Okay. So I'm only selecting the to-dos that user owns.
Oh, I see.
So this keeps me from returning and giving them access to to-do items that they don't own.
And that's why on line 90, we have the request of the user, which user's ID is this, and that's
Yes.
why
So this
the
keeps,
result is of the user.
yes, this keeps me from returning user or to-do items that do not belong to the current user.
Because the foreign key, right?
Because this is the foreign key to the user table. And so, that user ID and that user ID match, that guarantees that I'm only giving out the correct to-dos.
The primary key in one table is equal to the foreign key.
In another table, yes.
We are giving the same ID.
Yep, then they have access to it. So that's on the read. And on the insert, I have to indicate that this is a to-do item that I own. So when I create a to-do item, I want my user ID put in it so that I own it. So when I insert in the task and is completed like we did before, but now I'm also inserting the user ID to indicate this one's mine. So when I do this, $1 user ID comes from the request user field from the token. $2, the task comes from the body, and the is completed comes from the body. So I get the task and the is completed from the body,
Mhm.
but I get the owner, the user ID, the owner from the middleware, from the job token. Okay, and then likewise, this then indicates when I create a to-do, I'm saying I own this to-do item. And now when I try to update the to-do, I want to make sure that I'm not updating Noah's to-do items. So when I go here and I say update, I'm going to update the to-do. This is just what we had before. I'm updating the to-do, but now I'm also making sure that this is a to-do item that I own. And this keeps me from updating Noah's to-do items. Because if it doesn't match, the to-do ID needs to match, and the user ID needs to match. That way I am not modifying somebody else's to-dos. So the user ID comes from the jot token, from the request. The other fields come from the body. Well, the to-do ID comes from the params, and is completed, and the tasks come from the body. Okay, likewise, if I had a delete endpoint, I would put where to-do ID equals the ID from the param, and the user ID equals the user ID from the jot token from the auth middleware. Okay, that's how we do authentication. Is that reasonably clear?
Mhm.
All right, then before I quit, that's the end of this exercise. I've now gone through all the user management, but there's one last thing I want to do. And since I had students that were just always asking, how do I do this? How do I put this in? And I'd say, go back to your user management. And they'd spend hours trying to figure out what to do. I said, okay, I'm going to put together a guide. So if you go to your LMS and go to guides, and click on, I put it in full stack project because this is where the question usually comes up. And so you go to your full stack project and go to user management here, click that one. Here's a guide. It says, you can add user management to your project by making use of the user management exercise. This guide outlines the steps you can use. So here you go. So I'm going to go through this because it's going to be a review of everything we've done today on this exercise. So the first of all, in your schema, you need to have a users table. Okay. And it needs to have user ID, username, and password. This one, of course, is the one that the database maintains. This is the username the user gives you. This is the password that's been hashed from the user. Okay. Then go to the table where you need to have security and you need to have a specific user own it, and add a user ID column to that table. Remember in the to-dos table, we added a user ID so that I can indicate who owned that record. That's what you do. You do that, put that in. Okay. And now, let me skip those ones. Now, go to your server folder, install Argon 2 and JSON Web Token. And then you go in and you're going to need to get your token secret from your .env. And then you're going to add a sign up and a sign in endpoint. The sign up and sign in endpoint, you can just copy right out of the code that we did today. They'll be pretty much copy paste. I don't know there's much that has to change there, if anything. And then you'll need the authorization middleware and the error middleware in your final project. Those will already be provided for you, so don't need to worry about it. And then you just go into all your endpoints, and every time you need to deal with the user ID, like in a where clause, then you just get it from request.user.userID. Okay. Yeah. Then you go to your client. Ooh, that reminds me, this is something I forgot to point out. Here in my client, I have all of my code that does the fetches. Okay. So this is the client. So sorry, back to the exercise. This is the client code that does all the fetches. We have to modify our fetches now so that they pass in the authorization header. So we know that when you fetch the to-dos, you have to pass in the authorization header. So here I add a parameter here, which lets me put in the headers. So the method's going to be a get. The headers I put in the authorization header, and its value needs to be bearer space and whatever the JOT token is. Now I've provided up above here a function that reads the JOT token out of local storage. So you just call this function.
Thank you.
Okay, so you do it here on the post, you add the authorization bearer token header, and then you do it on your put, add the authorization bearer token there as well. Okay, add the authorization header in the places that need it. Okay, so now if I go back to the guide, then in your client, then you can do this use user and user context stuff that's in the client code. I didn't go over that with you, but it's basically it does the same thing we just did with context. We had cart context, this is user context. And the user context has the handle sign in and handle sign out and the user information in it in the context. So you go and you put that in here. And then in your app TSX, you put the user provider around your app. You create your register and sign in forms, which you might just copy paste. And then add sign in, sign out links. And then you go into your data TS or wherever you have your fetch calls and you add the authorization header in all those places. Okay. And that should be it. Now, one reason I'm going over this with you right now is because on Monday when we come in, we are going to do the code journal backend. What we're going to do is we're going to start with the code journal React solution, and you are going to change it so that instead of storing its data in local storage, you're going to store it in a database. So you're going to have a database. I think I give you the schema file. So you're going to have to create the database. You're going to have to create all the endpoints. And then you're going to have to go into your React code and change everything from using local storage to using fetch so that it does it through the server and the database. So you're going to change the code journal React from storing stuff in local storage to storing it in the database. You're going to give it a complete backend. So this will help you see how the whole thing now all fits together. Then you will have the code journal backend will be a complete code journal full stack solution with the code journal front end in React, the code journal back end in Express, and the database in Postgres. And once you've done that, you're going to go and you're going to add user management. And you're going to add all the user management stuff to your code journal, and you're going to make it so that you can sign in and sign out to your code journal, and different users can use it to have their own journal entries. Okay, so that's Monday. Okay.
And then, Robert,
By the way, I usually have people get done with everything by the morning except for user management, and they spend the afternoon doing user management. Okay, that's how it usually goes, because this turns out to be a lot easier. I sounded like it was a lot of steps, but it turns out to be pretty straightforward. Okay, that's it. What was your question?
Sorry, Robert, I had a question about, you said that we should think about the projects.
Yes, okay.
So I was wondering what direction we should be thinking.
Okay, let me